They called her crazy. They froze her money. They set the trap perfectly. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated her. For 7 years, she played the role of a failure while secretly building a case that could destroy them all. Now, in a silent courtroom with one sealed file, the hunter is about to become the hunted.
My own family called me crazy. My sister started the lie, and my mother's tears made everyone believe it. A doctor even signed a piece of paper to make it official. Now they sit in this courtroom ready to argue I am unfit to handle the $3.2 million coming my way. But they have no idea about the crimson file sealed and waiting on the judge's bench. This day has been 7 years in the making. What happens next will shatter their world. If you want to hear what happens, please comment and let me know where you are tuning in from. I am happy you are listening with me. First, a quick disclaimer. This story has dramatic scenes and fictional details meant to entertain and teach lessons. Any link to real names or places is a complete coincidence, but the values in the story are true and you may recognize them in your life. Let's start Jordan's story. It is 9 in the morning on a chilly Wednesday. I'm sitting in courtroom 7B at the Suffolk County Courthouse in Boston. The lights overhead hum, giving the wood paneled room a cold feeling. Across from me, my sister Natalie straightens her blazer and gives the judge a confident smile. She looks perfectly relaxed, as if she has already won. I am at my table completely alone. I do not have a lawyer or a pile of papers, just an untouched yellow notepad and a pen. Natalie has Mr. Montgomery, a slick lawyer in his late 40s who radiates confidence. My mother, Barbara, sits right behind them in the front row. Her hands are clasped tightly and her eyes are puffy and red. She is in a gray suit, playing the part of a worried mother. The room is not full, but enough people are here to make it feel very public. Reporters are clustered near the back. My Aunt Susan, my father's sister, is in the third row, her face showing nothing. I spot a man near the exit and look away. It is Agent Foster, my contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation in street clothes. High on the bench sits Judge Edward Chambers. He has silver hair and an expression you cannot read. At 61, he has seen countless family dramas play out here. He looks down at his papers, then at me, then over at Natalie. His gavel strikes once. This court is now in session. Case number 2025 CV4472. The issue is the conservatorship petition for Jordan Ann Keller. Miss Natalie Keller is the petitioner. Miss Jordan Keller is the respondent. Are both parties here? Yes, Your Honor. Montgomery stands to his feet and speaks. Yes, Your Honor, I answer, my voice quiet but steady. Judge Chambers gives a small nod. Let the record show this is a conservatorship hearing, not a criminal trial. The petitioner wants legal control over the respondent, claiming mental incompetence. Mr. Montgomery, you may begin your opening statement. Montgomery gets to his feet, fixing his tie. He walks to the center of the room like he is on a stage. He clears his throat and speaks to the judge. Your Honor, this case is about compassion. It is about family. It is about helping someone who cannot help herself. He pauses, letting his words sink in. Jordan Keller is 29 years old. She has no steady job and no real income. For years, she has lived alone, lost in paranoid fantasies that have only gotten worse. I feel every eye in the room turn to me. I do not move. I keep my expression neutral. I just sit with my hands folded and let him talk. Dr. Anthony Reed, a psychiatrist with 25 years of experience, diagnosed Miss Jordan Keller with paranoid delusions. She falsely believes she is an agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She believes her family is part of an illegal plot against her. She does not see that she is sick. She refuses treatment, Your Honor. She is a danger to herself and her own welfare. Montgomery points a remote. A screen lights up with a grainy black and white video. The date stamp reads Saturday, March 1st at 10:47 in the morning. It is me in a bank, yelling and waving my arms. A teller steps back. A security guard approaches me. The video stops. This was taken at Commonwealth Bank and Trust only 4 days ago. Miss Keller's bank account was frozen by court order to protect her money. When she found out, she became very angry and hostile. Security had to remove her from the bank. He pauses, letting everyone stare at the frozen image. He glances at Natalie, who looks down, perfectly playing the heartbroken sister. Natalie Keller is the CEO of Keller Properties, a very successful real estate company. She loves her sister very much. She has tried for years to get her help, but Jordan always refuses. She will not admit she has a problem. Now, a $3.2 million life insurance payment arrives in 45 days on Jordan's 30th birthday. There is a grave risk she will waste all of this money. Montgomery's voice softens. Your Honor, Miss Natalie Keller asks for only one thing. She wants the authority to protect her sister and get her the medical care she truly needs. She wants to manage the money until her sister is stable. This is not about control, it is about love and family. He sits down. The courtroom is quiet. Natalie dabs at her eyes with a tissue. Barbara makes a quiet, sobbing sound. Reporters write quickly in their notepads. Montgomery is very good at his job. He has told a story that sounds tragic and believable to anyone who does not know the real story. But I know the real story, and the judge does too. I look at Judge Chambers. He listens and writes, his face unreadable. Then I see it. A thick red file sits on his bench. It is sealed and has the words sealed. Federal file, U.S. Attorney's Office. He has not opened it, but I know exactly what is in there. It holds my credentials from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the complete investigation of Natalie's money laundering, and proof linking her to organized crime. That is why this hearing is just for show. Natalie has no idea what is in there. Montgomery does not either, but I do. The second Judge Chambers opens it, their entire act will fall apart. I look at Susan in the third row. Her face is blank, but our eyes meet for a moment. Agent Foster by the door sits perfectly still. He is waiting. We are all waiting. Judge Chambers clears his throat. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. He turns to me. Miss Keller, you are representing yourself. Do you wish to make an opening statement? Not at this time, Your Honor. A murmur of surprise fills the room. Natalie squints, confused. Montgomery whispers to her. She nods, but looks unsure. Good. Let them worry. The judge taps another folder with his pen. He speaks to Montgomery again. Before we hear from the witnesses, there is something I must address. The room becomes dead silent. He lifts the red folder and looks right at Natalie. Miss Keller, do you know about a federal file related to this case? Natalie's calm expression breaks. I am not, Your Honor. I did not know the federal government was involved. Montgomery is on his feet. Your Honor, I object. I was not told about this either. This is about guardianship, not a federal case. Judge Chambers nods slowly. I understand. However, I got this sealed file from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I cannot say what is inside right now, but both of you need to know it exists. It might become important later in this hearing. Natalie grips her tissue. Barbara sits up straighter. Montgomery's confidence has clearly vanished. The judge puts the folder back down in the middle of his bench. We will now call the witnesses as planned. Mr. Montgomery, you may call your first witness. Montgomery hesitates, looks at Natalie, then pulls himself together. Thank you, Your Honor. I lean back in my chair, enjoying this. Natalie believes she has already won this fight. My sister thinks she has already won, thanks to her video, a doctor's report, and our mother's tears. She is sure this is all going to plan, but she is terribly mistaken. The real fight hasn't even begun. It all started 6 days before, at my mother's 60th birthday dinner. That Friday night in late February, I walked into the harbor room at Rose Wharf. I knew right away it would be a dreadful evening. The restaurant was built right on the Boston Harbor. Giant windows showed the dark water and the sparkling city lights. It was a very fancy and exclusive restaurant. You needed to book a table months ahead of time. The waiters moved silently and gracefully. The champagne glasses were worth more than a month of my rent. The party was for my mother's 60th birthday. 30 people gathered in a private room with white roses and silver candles. I arrived 15 minutes late on purpose. It was just enough to avoid the awkward hellos and enter quietly. I was wearing a simple, inexpensive black dress, which was the entire point. But I realized it was the wrong thing to wear as soon as I walked in. Natalie stopped me right away. She wore a red Gucci dress that cost a huge amount of money. Her hair was perfect and her diamond jewelry sparkled. She looked like she belonged there. I certainly did not. You are late, she whispered in a sharp, quiet voice. And what is that you are wearing? This is a special night, Jordan. It is just a dress. It looks like a black sack, she replied. She looked around the room and then moved closer. Mom's friends are all here. They will ask about your job. What should I tell them? You can always just tell them the truth. I am a self-employed data consultant, I said. Natalie let out a small, nasty laugh. And how much did you earn last year? Maybe 10 or 15,000? She asked. My company is worth $50 million, you know. I did not answer and just walked past her. A huge crystal chandelier hung above the long dinner table. My mother was at the head of the table, her face flushed from the champagne. She looked lovely in a silk dress that went with her joyful smile. Jordan, my love, please come and sit here by me. But Natalie got there first. She quickly took the seat next to our mother and put a hand on her shoulder. Mom, Jordan can sit over there. These seats are for the Hendersons.
My name card was at the far end of the table near the kitchen doors. All the chairs next to me were empty. I was a stranger at my own mother's birthday party. No one came over to talk to me. The guests were all my mother's rich friends and Natalie's business partners. The room buzzed with talk of money, expensive fashion, and loud conversation. My Aunt Susan was not there. Natalie made sure she was not invited. Dinner was served, beginning with lobster soup and then filet mignon with perfectly arranged vegetables. I ate in silence as the chatter flowed around me, making me feel invisible. And that was fine with me. Being unnoticed is a useful skill for my job. At 8 o'clock, Natalie stood and lightly tapped her glass. I would like to make a toast, she announced with a smooth voice, to the most wonderful mother anyone could ever have. You built this family all by yourself. You were always there for both of us. Everyone in the room clapped. My mother softly dabbed a tear from her eye. It is my great honor to continue that legacy, Natalie went on. Keller Properties is doing great. We are growing and giving people new opportunities. And, Mom, it is all because of you. The guests clapped once more. Then her eyes landed right on me. And of course, we also have my little sister Jordan. She waited just a moment too long. She is still trying to find her place in the world, still figuring her life out. But we all love her, right? A few people laughed politely and looked my way. I felt my cheeks get hot with embarrassment. My mother added, Jordan was always a sensitive girl, not like Natalie. Natalie has always been a real fighter. A woman wearing a pearl necklace leaned over to me. And what is it that you do, my dear? I am a data consultant. Oh, and what company is that with? She asked. I work for myself. I see. Her smile tightened. Natalie jumped in smoothly. Jordan is just giving herself some time. There is no need for her to rush. She does not have a family of her own to look after, she added. I put my fork down on my plate. Excuse me, I need to use the restroom. I stood up, took my purse, and left the table. But I did something very important just before I left. I had opened a recording application on my phone. The app was made to look exactly like a weather forecast. I pressed the record button. I left the phone in my handbag, which I left on my chair. I waited in the restroom for around 10 minutes. This allowed the guests time to go to the balcony for their cigars and drinks. When I came back, the dining room was almost empty, but I heard voices by the windows. I paused in the doorway. It was Natalie speaking in a quiet, urgent voice. Mom, we have a big problem. The Harbor Towers project is short $22 million. The auditors are starting to ask questions. My mother's voice sounded a little slurred. What? How did that happen? That is not what is important, Natalie said back, her voice sharp. I need access to the trust fund. Dad's life insurance is $3.2 million. When does Jordan get access to it? She turns 30 in 45 days. That money belongs to her. Natalie laughed, but it was a bitter sound. If this project fails, we lose everything, the house, the business, our entire life. You have $350,000 in credit card debt. How are you going to pay for that? There was a short silence. Jordan does not need that money, Natalie said. She can barely manage her own life. She has no career and no relationships. If something happened to her, if she was found unable to manage her own affairs, you or I could become her legal guardian. My mother paused. Natalie, that sounds extreme. But you could tell from her voice she was only thinking of herself. Every word she said felt like a punch to my stomach. The phone in my purse was recording their whole confession and every detail of their plan. A few moments later, I walked back into the room. They immediately stopped talking. I picked up my purse from the chair and started for the door. Natalie looked up at me. Are you leaving so soon? I have to work in the morning, I answered. She gave me a small, superior smile. Oh, that is right, your work. Outside, the cold February air went right through my dress. I got to the parking garage, entered a rental car that was under a fake name, and just sat there. I stopped the recorder and played it back. The sound was perfectly clear. $22 million missing, a scheme to steal my inheritance, a plot to declare me mentally unfit. I encrypted the audio file and sent it to a secure server at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Then I sat there staring at the car's dashboard and let it all wash over me. The humiliation, the loneliness, and the awful truth that my own sister was trying to ruin my life. I had a feeling Natalie was in trouble. I just had no idea that destroying me was her solution. The following morning, everything would change. On Saturday morning at 7 o'clock, a loud pounding on my front door woke me up. It was so loud it sounded like they were trying to break it down. I lay in bed for a second, staring at the ceiling while my heart raced. The pounding came again. 3 hard, fast knocks echoed through my little townhouse. I threw off my covers, grabbed a sweatshirt, and pulled it on over my sleep clothes.
My bare feet were cold on the wooden floor as I went downstairs. I looked through the peephole and saw a man on the porch. He was in his mid-40s with thinning hair, a cheap suit, and a clipboard. He looked exhausted and irritated. He knocked again. I opened the door a tiny bit. "Are you Jordan Keller?" "Yes." "You have been served." He shoved a large envelope into my hand, turned around, and left without saying anything else. I watched him get into a dented old car and drive off. I shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a moment, feeling the strange weight of the envelope. Then I went into the kitchen, put it on my small wooden table, and sat down. The morning sky was gray and cold. The house was completely silent. It was just me, the quiet house, and this envelope. I tore it open. Two official documents lay on the table. They had logos and seals with my name printed right at the top. The first was a temporary restraining order. I read the words, my heart beating faster. Natalie Keller asked the court to block Jordan Keller from all bank accounts and property. It also said I could not contact her or my mother, Barbara Keller. Violating the order meant I would be arrested on the spot. It was signed last night, Friday at 6 o'clock, long before the party. My bank accounts were frozen at 6 this morning. I set it down and looked at the second paper. The title was Section 12, a request for an emergency mental health check. The petitioner was a doctor named Anthony Reed. The patient was me, Jordan Ann Keller, age 29. The report said I had severe paranoid delusions. It claimed I believed I worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It said I accused my family of illegal dealings. It mentioned I had no steady job. The doctor concluded I was a serious danger to myself. He recommended a 72-hour hold at the Brookline Psychiatric Institute. It was filed Friday at 8 in the morning, hours before I recorded my sister's plot. Natalie had planned this whole thing. She had been setting this up for weeks. I put the papers down and pressed my hands on the wood table. My breathing was shallow. I told myself to calm down and think clearly. This was not the time for fear. This was the time for a plan. I walked to a cabinet above the fridge. I took out a small lockbox and opened it. Inside was $340 in cash. It was mostly $20 and $10 bills held with a rubber band. My bank was locked, so I could not get any more money. I did have an FBI emergency fund of $2,400. It was in a credit union account under a fake name. That was my escape plan, not tied to Jordan Keller. But using that card would leave a digital trail. If Natalie's lawyers saw my financial records, they would find it. They would wonder where that money came from. My entire secret operation would be revealed. I could not use it. I closed the box and opened a drawer below the microwave. I found two prepaid phones inside. They were from the FBI and registered to false names. I turned one on and the battery was full. My secure laptop was upstairs in my bedroom, hidden inside a hollow book. All the proof against Natalie was on it. The laptop had bank records, fake company information, emails, and the recording from the party. Then I thought about a car, which I did not have. That was an FBI rule for undercover agents. Not having a registered vehicle means no paper trail. The Bureau always arranged my transportation. For other trips, I took trains or used ride-sharing apps. But this meant I was now stuck, which my sister had planned. I sat back down and stared at the two legal papers. Natalie had trapped me with no money and no way out. If I stayed here, she would send the police to take me for a 72-hour evaluation. By the time I got out, she would have already seized my inheritance. I had to act, but my plan needed to be smart. I picked up the clean phone and made a call. After two rings, a calm voice said my name, Jordan. It was Agent Marcus Foster, my partner for the last 7 years. He was the only person I could fully trust. But even he could not help me now. The restraining order and the Section 12 were already filed by Natalie yesterday. I could almost feel him thinking. He already knew what happened. The agency saw it coming but could not warn me. That would have alerted my sister. I asked if he could get me out of this, but he said no. If the agency interfered, it would destroy our entire case. Natalie's lawyers would say it was entrapment. A judge might dismiss all our evidence. We would lose the only chance to stop her. I shut my eyes. My mission was now very clear. I had to act out my part perfectly. I needed to go to that bank and completely lose control. Natalie had to believe her trap was working exactly as she wanted. She needs to see you panicked and unstable, he explained. She wants everyone to believe you are having a breakdown. He warned that they could not, under any circumstances, commit me. If I was taken to that hospital, our case would be lost. He said a colleague named Susan was ready to step in if things got too dangerous. But until that point, I had to handle it alone. I told him I understood. His voice softened a little. He told me to be careful. Natalie was moving much quicker than they had predicted. She was not just desperate, she was trapped, which made her dangerous.
I knew he was correct. I ended the call and looked at the gray morning sky. I had no money, no transportation, and no help. All I had was $340 and a very dangerous plan. I had to walk right into a trap and pretend to be surprised. I had two choices. I could wait here for the police to arrive, or I could go to the bank and play the part Natalie wrote for me. If I hid, she would win easily, so the bank was my only real move. I looked at the papers on the table. It was only 7:45 in the morning. The bank did not open until 9:30. That gave me some time to get ready. I went to my room and changed my clothes. I chose old jeans, a faded sweater, and tennis shoes. I pulled my hair back and did not put on any makeup. I needed to look like someone who was truly coming undone. I went to the kitchen and ate a breakfast bar without tasting a single bite. I counted my cash again, all $340. I put the bills in my wallet and tucked it into a deep pocket. Then I just sat in the quiet of my home. I could hear a car pass by sometimes and the faint noise of the city starting its day. The only sound in my house was my own breathing. At 8:30, I looked up the train times. The red line came every 12 minutes on the weekend. If I left at 9, I would be downtown by 9:40. The timing was perfect. I would get to the bank just 10 minutes after it opened. At exactly 9 o'clock, I stood up and put on my coat. The cold February air hit my face as I walked outside. I pulled my jacket tight and started the 10-block walk to the station. My breath made clouds in the chilly air. The neighborhood was calm with just a few runners and someone walking a dog. Nobody looked at me twice. I went down into the station, bought my ticket, and waited on the platform. The train pulled in 3 minutes later and it was already full. I found a small space by the doors and held onto the rail as we moved into the tunnel. The trip on the train lasted 30 minutes. I stood the whole time, not really seeing the stations as we passed them. I got off at the downtown crossing station and walked up to the city streets. I walked for 5 blocks with tall buildings all around me. People in suits rushed by with coffee, not noticing me at all. I entered the Commonwealth Bank at around 10:30. The inside was made of polished stone and shiny glass, with bright lights on the floor. I saw 4 tellers working on one side and loan officers at their desks on the other. In the back corner was a glass office with a nameplate that read Robert Turner, branch manager. I quickly saw security cameras in every corner of the ceiling. I walked to the first available teller, a young woman in a blue blazer named Amanda. She gave me a polite smile, but it faded when she saw me. She asked how she could help, and I told her my account was frozen and I needed to know why. As she typed on her computer, her friendly look turned into one of concern. She said there was a court order and that I had to talk to Mr. Turner. She pointed to the glass office and told me to go knock on his door. I knocked on the glass office door. A man in his 50s with cold eyes looked up, completely unsurprised. It was clear he was expecting me to arrive. He got up, let me in, and told me he had been waiting. I sat in the chair he pointed to, and he went back to his own. We stared at each other for a quiet moment. I asked why my account was frozen. He said a court order arrived that morning and he could not say anything more. I argued that I had a right to my money. He answered that the court order changed all of that. His voice was flat and dismissive. He said my problem was now a legal one. I explained I only needed a little money to pay my rent. He refused without a second thought. I could feel my voice getting louder and my anger was real. This was my money, but he said the court saw it differently. I stood up from my chair, saying this was illegal because I was never told. He explained that is how emergency orders work, and he seemed to enjoy saying it. I leaned over his desk. I asked if I could have just $1 for food. He just repeated that I had to talk to the court. I demanded to talk to his boss. He told me that he was the one in charge. I put my hands on his desk and told him to release my money now. His expression did not change at all. He just pushed a hidden button under his desk. 2 very large security guards appeared in the doorway almost instantly. They were big men in dark uniforms. Turner stood up and told me to leave. That is when I saw the cameras. One was in the corner, pointing right at me, with another one over the door. A third camera was outside, looking into his office. They were recording me from every angle. The entire situation was a setup. Turner was in on the plan, trying to make me lose my temper. Natalie wanted video of me being unstable. It was a perfect trap, and I was right in the middle of it. But since I knew it was an act, I could control how I reacted. I took a deep breath and let my voice tremble with fake rage. I begged, saying this was not right and that I needed my money. One of the guards came closer and said it was time to leave. I shouted that what they were doing was illegal and that I would report them. The guard grabbed my arm firmly. I pulled away just enough for the cameras to see, then stopped. I told him to take his hands off me, saying I had rights. His partner said they would remove me by force.
I looked at Turner, who was watching with a satisfied smile. I let my shoulders drop as if I was completely defeated. I got up and walked right out of his office. The security guards followed me through the bank. We passed the tellers and I saw Amanda staring with her mouth wide open. Other customers had stopped what they were doing to watch me. The guards followed me all the way to the front doors. I heard the door lock behind me. I stood on the sidewalk, finding it hard to breathe. The cold air hurt my lungs. The city was full of noise and motion around me. People would glance at me, then quickly look somewhere else. I was just another person having a terrible day. After a few blocks, I stopped against a wall to collect my thoughts. Natalie now had the video she needed. It was the perfect evidence of me yelling and fighting with security. It was exactly what she needed for her court case. But she did not know one very important thing. In 6 days, we would face each other in court. Her lawyer would play that video to argue I was unstable. Then I will tell the judge the whole story. I will explain how my sister and that crooked bank manager planned this, and Natalie will learn she made a very big mistake. I took a slow breath on the sidewalk to calm myself. I took out my phone to call an Uber. The ride home was 12 minutes and would be $18. I pressed the confirm button, but the payment would not go through. Of course, it would not. My bank account was totally worthless. My debit card was just a useless piece of plastic. I looked in my wallet. I had $340 in cash, but the app did not accept cash. I could not use my emergency FBI card either. That would create a digital record that Natalie's team could find. My entire case would be destroyed. So I had to walk home. I was going to walk all the way from downtown Boston to Jamaica Plain. The trip was 6 miles long. The walk would take me at least 3 hours. It was only 11 in the morning. The air was cold and wet. It was a kind of cold that gets deep inside your bones. A light mist started to fall. I did not have an umbrella. I just put my hood up and started the long walk home. I walked by Copley Square, where a stone lion protects the Boston Public Library. I walked through Back Bay, past houses with flower boxes and cars that cost more than I made in a year. Nobody looked at me twice. I was invisible. I was just another woman walking in the rain. Around noon, I got to Fenway. A slow pain began in my feet. The light mist had become a cold, steady rain. My coat was soaked all the way through. I went into a small store and used my cash to buy a bottle of water. That was $2. I had 338 left. As I kept walking, I began to think about my father. Michael Keller passed away 7 years ago when I was 22. His death was officially called an accident. It was a Tuesday morning and he was on his way to work. He was driving west on Route 2 near the city limits. His brakes stopped working, his car went off the road, crashed into a tree, and he died right away. The police report said it was a mechanical problem. A brake line had rusted. It was something that happened often in old cars. They did not think it was suspicious, but I knew the real story. 1 week before he died, my father asked me to come to his study. He shut the door, told me to sit down, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not anger or sadness, it was complete fear. Jordan, he said, I have to tell you something. If I have an accident, do not listen to anything Natalie tells you. She is not the person you believe she is. I remember that I laughed. It was a nervous, confused kind of laugh. Dad, what are you talking about? It is about the life insurance, he went on. I am changing it. It was all going to go to Natalie. Now it is going to you. You will receive it on your 30th birthday, $3.2 million. But you cannot tell a single person, especially not your sister. Why not? He looked straight into my eyes for a long time. Because she is desperate, Jordan, and desperate people do terrible things. 1 week after that conversation, he was gone. I never thought it was an accident, but I could not prove it. I was only 22, just out of college, working a dead-end job. What could I do? Accuse my own sister of murder? So I did the only thing I could think of. I applied to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It took 2 years before I was accepted. I spent another year training at Quantico and then got a job in the Financial Crimes Division in Boston. I asked for a special undercover job, the kind where you become a new person for years at a time. And that is what I did. For the last 7 years, my name has been Jordan Keller. I have pretended to be an unemployed freelancer, the failure of the family. And for those same 7 years, I have been slowly building a case against my own sister. I have been tracking her money, discovering her fake companies, and keeping a record of every conversation, every email, every single lie. My father was right. Natalie is a desperate woman, and she did a terrible thing. She killed him. Now, 7 years later, she is trying to get rid of me. By 3 in the afternoon, I reached Mission Hill. My feet were in a lot of pain. My jacket was completely wet. I still had 2 more miles left to walk. I just kept going. At 6:30, the sun began to go down. The rain had finally stopped, but the sky was a dark, heavy gray. The streetlights started to turn on. When I finally turned onto my street in Jamaica Plain, I saw my front door. It was open just a little bit. I stopped right there on the sidewalk. My entire body became tense. I knew for a fact that I had not left it open. I walked slowly up the front steps, pushed the door with my foot, and went inside. My living room was a complete disaster. Cushions from the sofa were tossed across the floor. Every drawer had been yanked open and their contents dumped out. All the books were torn from the shelves. It was clear someone was searching for something. I bolted up the stairs to my office. The desk was a chaotic mess. My papers were strewn everywhere. The laptop was still here, but its encryption made it worthless to them. But my notebooks were missing. I had three of them, all black, filled with handwritten notes about the Harbor Towers companies and Connor Flynn's financial records, information I kept offline. It was 7 years of my work recorded in pen. I rushed to the bathroom and looked in the sink. I saw only ash and the charred remains of paper. The smell of smoke lingered. A note was left on my desk from my mother. It said, "Jordan, we did this for your own good. You are not yourself. We love you." I crumpled the note into a tight ball and hurled it against the wall. They had burned my work, they invaded my home, tore through my life, and torched my evidence. But they don't know the most important thing. I made copies. I have every single page on my encrypted computer. Everything is backed up in the cloud under a secret name. I scanned and saved each page the day I wrote it. This is standard procedure at the Bureau. You always have a backup of your evidence. They believe they have won. They think the proof has vanished. But what they really did was make my job a lot simpler. I slid down against the wall until I was sitting on the floor. For the first time in 7 years, a new feeling washed over me. It was not anger or even fear, but a heavy, soul crushing exhaustion. The evidence was safe. That was not the issue. My bank accounts were all frozen, but I could access emergency cash. The real issue was facing the ugly truth. My own family was ready to ruin me just for money. My mother left a note telling me she loved me. Then she helped my sister wreck my house and burn all my research. I shut my eyes and tilted my head back. I knew they would be here at dawn. They would try to have me committed to the Brookline Psychiatric Institute for a 72-hour hold. While I was locked up, they would file to take control of my life. Then they would cash in the insurance policy and make it vanish, but I will not allow that to happen. My Aunt Susan is on her way. She is my father's sister and the one person in my family who always told me the truth, and she is bringing help. Sunday at 6 in the morning. A quiet knock on the door woke me from a restless sleep. I was on the sofa and completely disoriented. I must have fallen asleep around midnight, too exhausted to get out of my wet clothes. Every one of my muscles protested and my feet were aching. A deep cold had settled in the house. The knock came again. 3 soft taps. I forced myself to get up, moved to the window, and peeked outside. A woman in a denim jacket stood on my porch holding 2 bags of groceries. She was 58 years old, and her brown hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her eyes were sharp and saw everything. Susan Blake, my father's sister, my aunt. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. "I brought some breakfast," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Are you going to let me in?" I could only nod as I moved out of her way. She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the wrecked living room without saying a word. She headed directly to the kitchen and placed her bags on the counter. She began to pull out groceries. There was bread, eggs, butter, coffee, and a carton of orange juice. "Sit down," she said, motioning toward the small table. I did what she said. She filled a kettle and set it on the stove, then found a frying pan. "I heard about the court order," she stated while cracking eggs into a bowl, "and the plan to have you committed. How did you find that out?" A faint smile appeared on her face as she looked over at me. "I still know people at the Bureau." I just stared at her, confused. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation," she clarified, turning her attention back to the stove. "Where do you think I was employed for 25 years? In that moment, it all made sense. Susan Blake was more than just my aunt. She was a retired agent who had worked in the Boston office's Financial Crimes Division. She left in 2015, which was the same year I began my training. I had no idea. "Your cover story was that you were a school teacher," I said, trying to process the information. "A retired school teacher," she corrected me, whisking the eggs. "It was a very effective cover. Your father knew, of course, but no one else did. Not Barbara, and certainly not Natalie." She carefully poured the eggs into the hot pan. "After your dad passed away, I began my own quiet investigation. I thought Natalie was involved, but I lacked proof and authority. I was no longer an agent. I tried to give Barbara a warning, but Natalie cut me off completely. All of a sudden, I was no longer invited to family events. She told everyone I was simply a bitter and jealous woman." She paused for a moment to stir the eggs. "So I just watched. And I waited. For 7 very long years. She divided the scrambled eggs between 2 plates, added some toast, and placed one in front of me. I know all about harbor towers. I know about Connor Flynn, and I am certain that she murdered your father. I was speechless, just staring at her. You are sure about it? I always thought the brake failure was not an accident, but I could never prove it. She took a seat across from me with her own plate. Then, about a year ago, I was contacted by Agent Foster. He let me know you were with the Bureau, working on a deep cover assignment. I knew right then you were continuing my work. I picked up my fork, but my appetite was gone. Why did no one ever tell me? You needed to handle this by yourself. If I had intervened, it would have alerted Natalie. She had to see you as she wanted to see you, jobless, defeated, and completely alone. You played your role perfectly. Until yesterday, I said quietly. Susan nodded. Yes, until yesterday. Now she is moving her plan forward much faster. She took a bite of her toast, chewing it slowly. Natalie is coming for you sometime today, and Barbara will be with her. Dr. Reed is likely coming with them. Their goal is to get you admitted to Brookline Psychiatric. Once you are inside for 72 hours, she can file for a conservatorship and get that insurance money. I figured, well, we are not going to allow that. We will not let her get away with it, Susan said, putting her fork down and looking me in the eye. We will let her believe she's in control while we gather our proof. I am going to wear a wire. I will arrange to meet with Natalie and Barbara tomorrow. I will act like I am worried about you and get them to open up. What if they refuse to talk? Oh, they will talk. Natalie is full of herself. She believes she can get away with anything, and Barbara is a coward. She will break with just a little bit of pressure. Susan then reached into her jacket pocket and took out a tiny device, a recorder about the size of a thumb drive. This uses government-grade encryption. It is admissible in court. I just need one of them to confess to your dad's murder or to this whole conservatorship plot. We can do it tomorrow. Tonight I will call Natalie. I will say I am worried about your state. She will suggest coffee and I will record the entire conversation. I looked down at the tiny recorder. It looked so insignificant. 7 years of my life now relied on a single conversation. Then Susan's tone became very serious. You need to understand this. In 45 days, you will be 30 years old. On that day, the life insurance policy matures. It is worth $3.2 million. If Natalie doesn't have legal control over you by then, she loses everything. This means she will act fast and she will be careless. I can deal with her. I am sure you can too. But desperate people do desperate things. She leaned forward a little. Your father told me that just before he died, and he was 100% correct. I looked her in the eyes. Why are you doing all this for me? Susan answered without hesitation. Because you are Michael's daughter, and because Natalie murdered my brother. I want to see justice served just as much as you. We sat there in silence for a moment. Outside, the morning was beginning. A dog barked somewhere down the road. A car passed by the house. Soft morning light came through the kitchen window. Susan got up and took our plates. They will be here soon. Are you ready for this? I am ready, but I was wrong about when. 2 hours later, Natalie and Barbara arrived at my door and they had company. The first knock came at 8:53. I was in the kitchen, just looking at my burned notebook in the sink. The noise seemed to fill the entire house. 3 loud, hard knocks. They sounded official. Susan had left an hour before in her old Honda. She promised to return tonight with a strategy, but we both had a feeling Natalie would not wait that long. The court papers had been filed on Friday. The time was running out. I went to the front door and opened it. Natalie was on the porch in a dark coat, her arms folded across her chest. She wore an expression of fake concern that did not reach her cold eyes. Barbara stood right there, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as if she was already heartbroken. Beside her was a man I had never met, but I knew his name from the legal papers, Dr. Anthony Reed. He was a tall, slender man, perhaps in his early 50s, with silvering hair and wire-framed glasses. He wore a dark blue suit and held a leather briefcase, looking very official. He extended a hand to me. His voice was cool and impersonal. My name is Dr. Anthony Reed. I'm here for an emergency psychiatric evaluation under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 123, Section 12. I did not take his hand. I looked right past him to the 2 police officers waiting by their Boston police cruiser. You do not need to be here, I said, my voice perfectly level. I am not a threat to myself or to anyone else. Natalie moved a step closer. Jordan, please, we are just trying to help you. I almost laughed right in her face. I wanted to scream. Instead, I kept my gaze fixed on Dr. Reed. We have never met before, I said. How can you possibly evaluate a person you have never even spoken to? He opened his briefcase and took out a file.
I have reviewed the information provided by your family. It describes a pattern of troubling behavior. It includes delusional statements, unpredictable actions, and a violent outburst at a bank yesterday. The bank, of course. Turner must have called them the moment I was gone. Dr. Reed adjusted his glasses. Based on this file, he stated, I have cause to believe you are a danger to yourself due to mental illness. I am legally obligated to order an immediate evaluation and hospitalization. He took a pen from his jacket and signed the document with a single practiced stroke, and just like that, it was official. All for $25,000. That is what Susan told me Natalie had paid for that signature. The way he avoided my eyes and the speed of his pen told me everything. This is not legal, I said calmly. Barbara began to wail even louder. Oh, Jordan, dear, she cried, please do not make this any more difficult. An officer started walking toward me. Ma'am, he said softly, you need to come with us. I looked over at Natalie. She was smiling. It was a very small smile, almost invisible, but I saw it. This was her moment of triumph. She believed she had already won. I took a deep, steadying breath. I had to handle this perfectly. Any resistance would just prove their point. Susan's words came back to me. Do not reveal your strategy. Let them believe they are in control. Fine, I announced. I will go. Natalie's eyes widened in surprise. She had clearly prepared for a fight. You will? Barbara asked, her voice full of relief. I turned to go back inside for my jacket, moving slowly to give myself time to think. The untraceable phone from Susan was safely hidden in my pocket. When I faced them again, Dr. Reed was already walking to his car. The police officer asked me to follow her outside. She wanted everything to go smoothly. I walked down my own front steps with Natalie and Barbara right behind me. On the sidewalk, I turned for a last glimpse of my home. The front door was still ajar. An officer held the back door of the squad car open for me. At least they did not put me in handcuffs. I got into the back and the door shut firmly. The locks clicked into place. Natalie came to the window and tapped on it. I refused to look at her and give her what she wanted. The car's engine started. Dr. Reed settled into the passenger seat up front. The driver was a man in his 40s and his Boston accent was thick. Dr. Reed gave the destination, Brookline Psychiatric Institute. He added, the drive is only about 20 minutes. We left the curb and drove through Jamaica Plain. I saw the familiar brick houses and small stores. The trees had no leaves. The whole city seemed gray and chilly beneath the March sky. Dr. Reed turned around to look at me. You are making the correct choice, he said. This is all to keep you safe. I remained silent. I was thinking about the money. I thought about the email Susan was about to discover. And I thought about the recorder she would be wearing when she met with Natalie. We drove west on Huntington Avenue, on our way to Brookline. Traffic was light for a Sunday. We went past the Museum of Fine Arts, the historic brownstone homes, and the Simmons University campus. At 9:42, we turned onto a smaller street. We stopped in front of a tall brick building surrounded by an iron fence. A sign on the gate said, Brookline Psychiatric Institute Emergency Services. The car doors unlocked with a click. Dr. Reed got out first, then he opened my door. Please come this way, he directed. I walked behind him through the gate. We followed a concrete walkway to the main entrance. The building was old and looked sad. It had small windows and very large, heavy doors. The lobby had a strong smell of bleach mixed with old coffee. A security guard was at a desk. A nurse wearing blue was waiting by locked doors inside. Dr. Reed gave her my paperwork. She looked at it, gave a slight nod, and then looked right at me. Miss Keller, I am Nurse Patel. I will handle your admission. Please come with me. A loud buzzing noise went off and the inner doors were unlocked. Beyond them was a long hallway, painted a dull beige. The lights were bright and the floors made a squeaking sound. We went past a common room where a television played softly. We also passed a station for nurses and a line of closed room doors. Nurse Patel stopped at a little office. She pointed to a chair for me. I have to take your personal items now, she said. Your phone, your wallet, your keys, and any jewelry. I took the spare phone from my pocket and put it on her desk. Then I gave her my wallet and house keys. She put it all into a see-through plastic bag and sealed it. These will be returned to you when you leave, she told me. When will I leave? I had to ask. Your 72-hour observation starts right now. Dr. Reed will be evaluating you for the next 3 days. So, 72 hours. I would be stuck here for 3 days. Natalie would be taking my life apart. Can I make just one phone call? I asked her. You cannot until we finish your intake, Nurse Patel replied. That is the rule here. She took me to another hall and into a tiny room. There was just a bed, a single chair, and a small window covered in wire. I noticed the lock was on the outside of the door.
A person will come to speak with you soon, she told me. She then walked out and shut the door. I heard the lock turn. I went and sat on the bed. The mattress was as hard as a board. The blanket felt rough. I could see a small walled-in yard from the window, but I did not feel scared, not at all. Natalie thought she had won. She thought I was trapped. She could now get control of my money and then the insurance in 43 days. But she did not know about Susan. She had no idea about the hidden recorder. And she certainly did not know that I would be leaving in just 12 hours. I leaned back on that hard bed and stared up. 12 hours. I could handle waiting 12 hours. Susan was out there in Boston starting our plan. When I got out, Natalie was going to learn she had made a terrible error. The room became dark. I lay there, looking at the ceiling, just counting the time. 8 o'clock passed, then 9, then 10. A faint buzzing from the light in the hall came from under my door. I could hear a woman crying somewhere nearby. A man in another room was yelling at nothing at all. Susan told me she had a plan. I just had no idea it would be like this. At exactly 10 o'clock, all the lights went out. The entire building was without power. The hallway became completely dark. The buzzing noise was gone. Everything was quiet for a second. Then a fire alarm began to shriek. Flashing red lights pulsed through the hall. I sat straight up in bed. I could hear running in the hallway. It sounded like staff, patients, and security. A person was yelling commands, but the alarm was too loud to understand. My door was suddenly thrown open. A nurse was standing there, out of breath. Her uniform was messy. Miss Keller, we have an emergency. You must get to the medical wing right away. I asked what was going on. She just said, please, you have to follow me now. I did not argue. I jumped out of bed and went with her into the hall. It was a total mess. Patients were wandering from their rooms, confused by the bright flashing. Workers were trying to guide people. Guards rushed past, their radios making static noises. The nurse took my arm. She pulled me away from the crowd to the far end of the corridor. We went around a corner. I saw an emergency exit standing wide open. That exit is always locked. The nurse looked me right in the eye. She said a single word, go. I was in total shock as I stared at her. What are you saying? You are telling me to go? She repeated herself. You have about 30 seconds until they notice you are missing. That was all I needed to hear. I took off. The stairs were like a cold cement tube. Only the red emergency lights lit the way. I raced down, taking 2 steps at once with my bare feet. My heart was pounding hard in my chest. I reached the bottom floor and pushed open the heavy exit door. The cool night air felt sharp on my skin. I was behind the building in the ambulance area. I spotted Susan's Honda Sport utility vehicle with the engine on. Susan reached across and opened the passenger side door. Hurry, get in, she urged. I jumped inside and she floored the accelerator before my door was even shut. We sped out of the lot with squealing tires and turned onto a small street. As I tried to catch my breath, I asked her, how did you do all this? Susan watched the road as she spoke. Agent Foster reported a false emergency. He said a patient was having a bad allergic reaction in the secure area. That made a distraction. Then I set off the fire alarm and unlocked the exits from a distance. The Federal Bureau of Investigation still knows some people who work in maintenance. I could not believe what I was hearing. You hacked into their alarm system, Susan replied. I did not hack anything. I only had to make one call. We got onto Beacon Street and mixed in with the other cars. Susan drove by the book, following all the laws so we would not get noticed. I had to know, where are we going? She replied. To a safe place. We went north on Route 1. We drove past shopping centers, gas stations, and diners with glowing signs. Boston's lights grew smaller behind us. About 20 minutes later, Susan turned into a little motel called the Riverside Inn. The place looked old and tired. It probably had not been fixed up since the 1980s. The paint was peeling, and the parking lot was cracked. I noticed there were no cameras. Susan stopped the car and stepped out. Wait in the car, she said. I watched her go to the office and talk to the man working there. She used $60 in cash to rent a room. He gave her the key for room 12. Susan returned to the car. She drove us to the side of the motel. Our room was up on the second floor. We climbed the outside stairs and Susan opened the door. It was a very small room. It smelled like stale cigarettes and dampness. There was a double bed with a worn-out mattress. It had a very old television. The bathroom faucet was dripping, but the heat was on, and I felt secure. Susan locked the deadbolt and closed the curtains. You need to be here for the next 3 days, she said. You cannot leave the room. And do not use your phone. Natalie is probably trying to track it. I told her, they took my main phone at the hospital, but I have the other one you gave me. She just said, good. Only use this for an emergency call to me, Susan said, handing me a phone.
She placed a canvas bag on the motel bed. Inside was clean clothing, soap, some protein bars, and water. I will bring you meals and anything else you require. For now, focus on everything you have on Natalie. Our case for Wednesday's hearing must be airtight. I had to ask her, but what is your plan? What will you do? Susan met my gaze directly. I am meeting with Natalie and Barbara tomorrow. I will be wired for sound. I will make them admit to everything they did. A huge weight lifted, and I sat heavily on the bed. For the first time in 3 awful days, I could actually breathe. My hands were shaking, my feet were freezing and dirty, but I was finally safe. I told her, Susan, that recording changes everything. There is no turning back. It would send Natalie and Barbara to jail. The family I once knew will be gone for good. Susan nodded slowly. I know.
Are you truly prepared for that consequence? She watched me closely. Her expression was firm, but her eyes held a profound sadness, perhaps even sorrow. Jordan, she began gently, they were not your family anymore after they took your father's life. A piercing ache shot through me. My dad, Michael Keller, he showed me how to ride my first bike and tie a perfect knot. He always taught me to do the right thing. He was the man whose brakes failed 7 years ago on a wet February night because someone cut them.
All right, I agreed firmly. Let us do this. From her coat, Susan revealed a small black recording device. It was as small as a flash drive. This is a special encrypted recorder from the agency. If I can get them speaking, it will record everything. She placed it on the table by the bed. You should try to rest. Tomorrow will be very difficult. As she walked to the door, I had to stop her. Susan, I said, I really appreciate this. She stopped and glanced back, offering a small nod. Your dad would have done the very same for you. Then she left. I locked the door and returned to the bed. The motel room was deathly still. All I could hear was a passing car on Route 1 and the gentle hiss from the radiator. I took out the burner phone and just looked at it. I had a powerful urge to phone Agent Foster to tell him I was safe, but Susan was very specific with her orders. A call could be tracked, revealing where I was hiding, so I turned the phone off and set it beside the recorder.
Tomorrow, Susan would see Natalie. She would carry the recorder with her. She would know exactly what to ask. By the end of the day, we would have the proof required to stop my sister. I leaned back and shut my eyes. Just 3 more days. That was all it would take until the hearing. In 3 days, I would enter the courtroom and reveal every one of Natalie's lies. I could absolutely hold on for 3 days. My Monday started at 6 in the morning. I took a shower in the dingy bathroom and made some instant coffee. At 8 o'clock, I sat on the bed with my secure laptop. The curtains stayed shut, keeping the morning light out. I logged in under an alias to get to my hidden digital files. Everything was exactly as I had left it. I had copies of everything: financial statements, emails, official papers, and even the journals Barbara had destroyed. This was months of work. I began with the file named Harbor Towers. The financial details I uncovered were shocking. The city had provided $35 million to build new housing for 120 low-income families in South Boston. This project was meant to be Natalie's greatest success at Keller Development. She made public speeches, was seen with the mayor, and took pictures with hopeful families. But somewhere along the line, $22 million from that fund disappeared. I traced the sequence of payments. The money moved from the Harbor Towers project to a business in the Cayman Islands. It then was sent to a second company, and after that a third. Each payment was calculated to be just under the amount that would trigger a government alert. The money trail went cold at an anonymous offshore account. While there was no owner's name, I had a strong suspicion who it belonged to. I just had to find the evidence. I opened the folder of saved emails. There were thousands of them. It had taken me weeks to organize them and mark any message mentioning Flynn Turner or Harbor Towers. I began searching through the marked emails for the one thing I needed. At 10:30 that morning, I discovered it. The first email was from January 15th, 2025. Natalie had sent it to a person with the initials CF. She wrote that the project was delayed and she required an additional 60 days to move the money. The reply was blunt: You get 60 days, that is all. The person also included a threat: if the authorities find out, you will face this alone. CF could only be Connor Flynn. I had seen his name many times in my investigation. He was a notorious figure who laundered mob money through Boston real estate. He was also my sister's hidden business associate. I leaned back, my eyes fixed on the display. This was the missing piece. Natalie was not just embezzling from a public project, she was washing money for the Irish mob. I continued to search. At 11 o'clock, I uncovered another email. This one was from Natalie to R. Turner at Commonwealth Bank, sent on February 28, 2025. The subject was simply Jordan. The email said, "Her account has been locked. Deny her access to any money." It continued, "Make sure you record her when she arrives at the bank. I need to show that she is mentally unstable." R. Turner's reply was quick. "It is all set. The security cameras are positioned. She is walking into a trap." My hands tightened into fists as raw fury surged through me. Turner was more than a bank employee. He was Flynn's informant, looking out for government investigations. That explained how Natalie was always aware of my moves. It was how she knew I was close to the truth. Turner had betrayed me. I forced myself to take a calming breath and resumed my work. By 2 in the afternoon, I understood their entire strategy. I created a new document and began to assemble all my findings. The time had come to construct my case. My sister Natalie Keller, along with her associate Connor Flynn, ran a criminal operation. They used the $35 million Harbor Towers Fund as their starting point. They moved $22 million through a shell corporation. The money path was complicated, going from Harbor Towers to CBZ Holdings, then Ocean View Capital, and finally Blue Horizon. I had emails showing Natalie and Connor organizing the details. They set a 60-day timeline for themselves. I also had her text messages with Richard Turner, plotting to lock my bank accounts and portray me as insane. They established front companies. CBZ Holdings was founded on December 8, 2024. Ocean View Capital was registered on December 15th. Blue Horizon was incorporated on January 3rd, 2025. They paid Dr. Anthony Reed $25,000 for a fraudulent psychological evaluation. They submitted that report to support an urgent legal action against me on March 1st. Natalie convinced a judge to issue a temporary restraining order on February 28th. I even have audio from my mother Barbara's 60th birthday party where she and Natalie discussed taking my inheritance. I secured all of this information and electronically sent the complete file to the FBI. Then there was nothing to do but wait. At 5 o'clock, the burner phone rang. Agent Foster's voice came through crisp and direct. "I have the file," he stated. "This is very strong, Jordan. We have enough to bring in Natalie and Flynn immediately." I responded, "Not right away. I need the confession. I must have them admit what they did to my father." He cautioned, "Jordan, any delay gives Natalie a chance to escape." "She will not escape," I said with confidence. "She believes she has won. She thinks I am hospitalized and that in 42 days she will inherit $3.2 million. She is not going anywhere." Foster paused briefly. "What about Susan? Is she prepared?" I assured him. "She meets with them tomorrow. She is going to get the confession on tape and then this nightmare will end." "But what if she fails?" he asked. I glanced at all the evidence displayed on my computer. I told him, "Even without it, we have enough evidence to imprison them for 20 years. "But getting justice for my father requires me to hear them confess," I insisted. I heard Foster sigh through the phone. "All right, Jordan, please be safe. These people took a life once. They are capable of doing it again." I simply said, "I am aware." I ended the call and put the phone down. Outside, daylight was fading. My tiny motel room grew dark with shadows. I listened to the steady flow of cars on Route 1, all making their way toward the city. Tomorrow, Susan would sit down with Natalie and Barbara. She would have the recorder on her. She was prepared with all the right questions to ask. If the plan worked, we would have their admission of guilt by tomorrow evening. I shut down the laptop and lay down on the bed. My whole body ached from being in one position for so long. My eyes stung from looking at the monitor, but for the first time in a while, I felt a tiny spark. It was a feeling of hope. Just 2 more days to go. That was all I needed, 2 days before the court date. 2 days before I could step into that room and show the world who Natalie really was. I was sure I could hold on for 2 more days. At 8 o'clock on Monday evening, I switched on the television. My eyes were strained from a full day of examining documents and messages. I needed a distraction. I wanted to listen to someone else's voice for a change. I changed the channel to Boston 7 News. A news anchor had a grave expression as she began her story. "We have some breaking news. Boston police are looking for 29-year-old Jordan Keller. She escaped from Brooklyn Psychiatric Institute late last night. Keller had been admitted for an emergency evaluation based on a Section 12 order. Authorities believe she could be a danger to herself. If you have any information, please call the Boston police." My old driver's license photo appeared on the screen. It was taken 3 years ago at the registry, and I looked tired and annoyed. I stared at the television for a moment before switching it off. I sat in the complete silence of the motel room. The only sounds were the hum of the old refrigerator and the faint noise of cars on Route 1. I took out my secret phone and called Foster. He picked up immediately. Before I could say anything, he just said, "I know." "I am watching it right now," I told him. "They issued a warrant for my arrest." My own voice sounded thin and distant.
Foster said Natalie is executing her plan perfectly. She is painting you as the villain, the unstable sister who fled a mental institution, a dangerous person on the run. I asked, "Can you get rid of the warrant?" "No," he replied, his tone serious. "If the Bureau gets involved now, it will blow your cover. Her lawyers will claim federal interference, and a judge could throw out our entire case. We have to see this through." I just shut my eyes. "So what should I do now?" "You stay where you are. Do not leave the motel. Do not use your real name for any reason. Susan will bring you food, and in 2 days, when we are in that courtroom, we will present all of our evidence. The warrant will be meaningless then."
"But what if someone sees me before that?" Foster was quiet for a second. Then he said, "If that happens, we have already lost." I hung up the phone. I sat down on the bed and leaned my head against the wall, my hands resting in my lap. For the first time in 7 years, I felt truly and utterly alone. It was more than just being by myself. I had spent plenty of time alone during this case. I had been alone in surveillance vehicles, in cheap apartments, and at family dinners where I had to fake a smile while a recorder was running. But this was a different kind of feeling. This was an emptiness that cut to the bone. I did not have a family anymore. Natalie and Barbara were trying to have me locked away. My father was gone, murdered by the two women who should have loved him the most. My mother had disappeared long ago, and I had no clue where she was. I had no real friends. 7 years of working deep undercover meant my whole life was an act. There were no real relationships, nobody I could truly depend on. Every word I said was a calculation, every smile was a tactic. I had Susan and I had Foster, but Susan was risking her own safety for me, and Foster was constrained by regulations that always seemed to be in our way. I thought of my dad, Michael Keller. He was the one who showed me how to play baseball, how to change a tire, and how to get back on my feet after being knocked down. It had been 7 years since his funeral, and I had always felt it was no accident, but I couldn't prove it. For 7 years, Natalie was my focus. For 7 years, I patiently gathered the evidence for this case. For 7 years, I had to be someone else. I was the younger sister who couldn't keep a job, the one who was a letdown, the family problem. Now, with just 2 days until the hearing, I was hiding out in a motel, seeing my own picture on the news, just hoping no one would spot me. This was the price you paid for this work. You sacrifice everything. You give up your name, your relatives, and your entire life, all for the mission. And sometimes it felt like the mission was the only thing I had. At 9 o'clock, there were 3 quiet knocks on my door. I checked the peephole. It was Susan. I opened the door for her. She was holding a paper bag from a local diner. Inside were a sandwich, some French fries, and a bottle of water. "I saw the news," she said softly. "Yeah? How are you doing?" "I am okay," I lied. She put the bag on the little table near the window and then she looked at me. "No, you are not, but you will be. In 2 days, all of this will be over. Natalie will be in custody. Barbara will be in custody, and you will have your life back." "I am not even sure what my life is anymore," I confessed. Susan came and sat on the bed beside me. "You can worry about that later. For now, we need to finish what your father started." I looked at her face. She was 58, a former FBI agent who was now living a peaceful life as a teacher. But in that moment, in that motel room, she was an agent again. She appeared sharp, determined, and prepared for what was ahead. "Tomorrow," she stated, "I will meet with Natalie and Barbara. I will be wearing a recorder and I will get them to admit to everything." "What if they do not want to talk?" I asked her. "Oh, they will talk," Susan replied with absolute confidence. "I know how to make people talk. That is what I did for 25 years. I just gave a small nod. "Okay." Susan got up to leave. "You need to get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be an important day." She walked to the door but stopped before she opened it. "Jordan," she said, looking back, "your father would be extremely proud of you. You know that, do you not?" A lump started to form in my throat. "I hope so," I managed to whisper. "He would be," she said again, her voice full of certainty. She opened the door. "I will see you tomorrow evening." And then she left. I bolted the door after she was gone and sat back down on the bed. The sandwich was on the table, the bag still giving off a little warmth. I knew I should eat something, but my stomach was in a tight knot. I lay down and just looked up at the ceiling. The motel room was silent. Every now and then a car would drive by outside, and the neon sign for the motel hummed quietly. Tomorrow Susan was going to meet Natalie. She would have the wire on. She would pose exactly the right questions. If her plan was successful, if she could get that confession, then nothing else would matter. The warrant, the articles, the public shame, it would all become proof, and Natalie was going to prison. I squeezed my eyes shut. I only had to survive 2 more days. Just 2 more days. I could handle that. It was Tuesday morning, 7:30. I sat on the motel bed with my secure laptop running and the burner phone in my hand. I had the curtains drawn shut. The door was securely locked. I was waiting to hear my aunt meet the 2 women who were trying to ruin my life. My phone buzzed. It was Susan. "I am ready," she announced. Her tone was steady and sure. "The wire is active. Can you hear me?" I opened the audio feed on my computer. A green line pulsed on the screen. I heard her voice with perfect clarity. "Loud and clear. Good luck. I am calling her number right now." A phone started ringing through my earpiece. Then I heard Natalie's bright voice. "Aunt Susan, what a lovely surprise." "Natalie, my dear, I learned what happened with Jordan. I am very concerned. Can we meet?" There was a short pause. I could feel Natalie considering the request. "Of course," Natalie finally said. "I am so glad you reached out. My mother and I were just about to call you. I want to help." Susan then asked, "Where is a good place to meet?" "Let's meet at Cafe Nero downtown at 8 o'clock. My mother will be with me. I will see you there." Susan disconnected the call. A moment later, she spoke into the wire. She took the bait. "I will get everything recorded." I watched the clock. 7:45, 8 o'clock. I put in my earpiece to listen. At 8:15, the sounds of a bustling cafe filled my ears. I could hear espresso machines hissing, chairs scraped across the tile floor. A low hum of conversation was in the background. Then Susan's voice came in, crisp and distinct. "Natalie, Barbara, thank you for meeting me." "Aunt Susan." Natalie's voice was syrupy sweet and it made me feel ill. "Thank you for coming." I could hear them embrace. Then Barbara spoke, her voice thin and full of nerves. "We are just so terribly worried about Jordan. She is not acting like herself." "What has been going on?" Susan asked. "I heard she was at Brookline." "She was," Natalie replied. "But she escaped. The police are searching everywhere for her. We do not know where she went." "Escaped? Why on earth would she do that?" Natalie let out a long, dramatic sigh, a perfect act of a worried sister. "Because she is delusional, Aunt Susan. She believes we are trying to harm her. That is completely false. We are just trying to get her some help." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. I wanted to scream, but I made myself stay quiet and listen. "How can I help you?" Susan asked. "If she contacts you," Natalie said, "you must let us know right away. We need to find her before she harms herself." A brief silence followed. Then Susan spoke again, her voice now softer, laced with concern. "I am still confused. Why was she admitted to Brookline?" Barbara jumped in to answer, her voice reedy and tense. "She has been unstable for a while now. She has no career, no money. She just sits in that house all day, scribbling in those journals." "We had to get her committed under a Section 12, Natalie added, without missing a beat. "It was to keep her safe." Susan then inquired, "And what is this about taking over her finances?" My breathing stopped. After a long pause, Natalie asked cautiously, "How did you find out about that?" "It is just family gossip," Susan answered smoothly. "You know how stories get around." Natalie sounded relieved. "It is only a precaution. Jordan's 30th birthday is near, and with it comes a $3.2 million insurance payment. If she is declared unable to manage it, then someone else has to step in. And I am guessing that person would be you," Susan said. "Naturally," Natalie responded. "I am her sister." "What about the inheritance money?" Susan continued to press. "What are your plans for using it?" The atmosphere changed as Natalie chose her next words very carefully. "The money is for Jordan's ongoing care and to get her the best treatment." Then Barbara, their mother, spoke up, her voice unsteady. "Susan, we desperately need that money. The business is going under. If we do not get it—" Natalie's voice cut her off like a knife. "Mother," Barbara immediately fell silent. On my laptop, I watched the audio signals spike. Barbara's panicked words were cut short by Natalie's sharp command. Susan let the silence stretch out before she spoke again in a calm voice. "So, this is actually about the business." "This is about my family," Natalie corrected her. "This is about making sure Jordan is taken care of." "I understand," Susan said. "If she gets in touch with me, I will let you know." "Thank you very much, Aunt Susan. We truly appreciate your help." Then I heard the sounds of them getting up from the table and saying goodbye. Susan's quiet voice came through my earpiece. "I am leaving now. I have the recording." About 10 minutes later, someone knocked on my motel room door. I opened it and Susan walked in. She looked tired, but her face was resolute.
I got it, she said to me. She pulled a tiny digital recorder from her shirt and set it down on the table. Natalie admitted the conservatorship is just to get your money. Barbara almost revealed everything. I plugged the device into my laptop and pressed play. Barbara's voice was filled with pure desperation. We have to get that money, Susan. The business is failing. Then I heard Natalie's cold, sharp tone. Mother, we can use this in court, I said. It establishes their motive. It proves they conspired. Susan nodded in agreement. But it does not tell the full story. I looked at her, confused. What do you mean? We can show they are trying to steal your inheritance, Susan clarified. But we cannot show they killed your father. That is the most important part, Jordan. A confession to that crime will send them to prison for life. I dropped down onto the edge of the mattress. She was completely right. This recording was a disaster for them. It was proof of fraud, conspiracy, and maybe even false imprisonment. But it did not mention murder. So what is the next step? I asked. Susan paused for a moment. A determined look then came over her face. I am going back in, she announced. I will push them tomorrow. I will bring up Michael and make them confess. A cold feeling washed over me. That is far too dangerous. If they suspect you are on my side, they will not suspect anything. They just see me as a worried aunt, Susan continued. They are totally convinced that I support them. I looked at her face. She was 58 years old and had been retired for years, but right then I saw the former agent she once was. She was clear-eyed, focused, and ready for whatever came next. Okay, I finally said, we will make one final attempt tomorrow. Susan picked up the small recorder and put it safely back into her purse. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow we will end all of this. After she left, I was alone in the dingy motel room. I stared at my laptop screen. The audio file was stopped at the exact moment Barbara said, "We need that money." We had evidence of their scheme. We understood their reason. But the whole truth was still missing, but not for much longer. Susan was going back in the next day. She would press them for more information. She would ask the difficult questions that we needed answered. If everything went according to plan, by tomorrow night we would have their confession, the one about my father. We only needed one more day. That was all. One more day until the hearing. One more day until I could enter that courtroom and see Natalie's world come crashing down. I could definitely wait one more day. At 1 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, my phone started to vibrate. It was Susan calling. Susan, I said when I answered. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the stress just beneath the surface. Natalie just asked me to come to the house. She says there are family issues I should know about. I sat up straight on the bed. She is inviting you to the estate? Yes, she said she wants a private meeting, just her, Barbara, and me. My heart began to pound inside my chest. This must be it. She is going to confess. That is what I am hoping, Susan said in agreement. She trusts me completely because she thinks I am helping her. She thinks I am on her side. You have to be careful, I told her. If she starts to get suspicious. She will not, Susan interrupted. I know precisely how to handle her. I could hear the familiar sounds of her getting the wire ready. I heard the quiet click of the recorder and the sound of her shirt rustling. I have a 4-hour battery, Susan said. The sound is coming in perfectly. I am leaving to go there now. I will be listening to everything, I replied. She hung up the phone. I put my earpiece in and started the monitoring program on my laptop. At 2:15, I heard Susan speak. Natalie, Barbara, thank you for inviting me. Natalie's voice was polite, but it had a cold, sharp quality to it. Aunt Susan, please come inside. We are so glad you were able to join us. I heard their footsteps echoing on a marble floor before a heavy door closed. Then came the quiet sounds of a living room, a couch creaking as someone sat down. Please have a seat, Natalie said. Can I get you some tea or coffee? No, I am fine, thank you, Susan replied. What did you want to talk about? There was a short period of silence. Then Natalie started to talk, her voice now much quieter. It is about Jordan, and it is about the future of our family. Aunt Susan, you are Michael's sister. You knew him better than almost anyone. Did he ever say anything to you about us? What kind of thing do you mean? Susan asked. I could hear the shakiness in Barbara's voice. About how Natalie became part of our family. Susan played her role perfectly. I'm aware he adopted her when she was a baby. Natalie's voice grew sharp. Where did you hear that information? Susan replied with calm. Michael shared that with me years ago. He told me it never mattered. You were always his daughter by birth or not. A bitter laugh escaped from Natalie. He might have said those words, but he did not mean them. When he died, he changed his life insurance. Jordan became the beneficiary, not me. He left it to his biological daughter, Jordan. That is not correct, Natalie. Do not even try. Natalie's voice was like ice. I am certain of what took place. He found out that I knew the real story. I had known for a long time, so he chose to punish me for it. Barbara's voice was shaky. We did not want you to discover it that way. I was 16 years old when I found out, Mom. I found the adoption records in your closet. I stayed silent because I thought if I worked harder and became more successful, he would finally accept me as his true daughter. I lay still on the motel bed, hanging on every word. She was just a teenager. Susan picked her next words with great care. But he always treated you. He left me with nothing at all, Natalie cut her off. Jordan received 3.2 million. What about me? I got a business drowning in debt, so I decided to handle it myself. A thick silence filled the room. Then Susan spoke once more. What do you mean, what you had to do? After a long pause, Natalie's voice returned, cold and clear. I took care of the problem. What problem did you handle? I handled him, Michael. That car crash was not an accident, Aunt Susan. Barbara let out a loud gasp. Natalie! She is already aware, Mom. Just see the look on her face. She does not look surprised at all. I could hardly draw a breath. My own hands were shaking. I pushed the earpiece deeper into my ear. Susan's voice stayed steady and calm. What did you do exactly? Natalie confessed. I cut the brake line. The date was February 14th, 2018. He was driving to his office. The brakes failed on Route 2. His car went off the road, hit a tree, and he died instantly. Barbara was now crying uncontrollably. We had no choice. Susan's voice interrupted her. I knew, Barbara confessed. I knew her plan, and I did nothing to prevent it. My mother helped me, Natalie confirmed. The night before she let me into the garage, she also turned off the security cameras for me. After he was gone, we played the part of the grieving family. The police did not suspect anything. I felt tears run down my face. My father, the man who showed me how to ride a bike, who helped me with schoolwork, who told me I could be whatever I wanted. You killed him, Susan stated, her voice full of disbelief. But what was the reason? How could you murder your father? Natalie's reply was terrifyingly simple. He was going to remove me from his will entirely. She explained that he had informed her that everything would go to me, Jordan, the company, the house, and all of his money, so she acted to make sure that did not occur. Barbara's voice was filled with panic. But his plan happened anyway. He altered the will 1 week before he passed. We did not know, Natalie went on. By then, it was not possible to undo it. So I have been patient for 7 years. I waited until Jordan turned 30. I waited for the $3.2 million. Now the time has come for me to collect. I heard a chair scrape across the floor through the earpiece. I should probably go now, Susan said, her voice unsteady. Why are you in such a hurry? Natalie's voice sounded amused. You are not going to report this, are you? Nobody would believe you anyway. We are family, Aunt Susan. We look out for each other. Is that not right? Susan gave a simple answer. Right, family. I heard the sound of a door opening. Then came Susan's quiet, urgent words. I am out. The recording is safe. I pulled the device out of my ear and sat in the quiet motel room. She did it. Natalie killed my dad, and Barbara knew. She assisted her. For 7 years, I had looked for answers, and tonight, they were finally mine. I pressed play on the audio file on my computer. Natalie's voice was perfectly audible. I cut the brake line. February 14th, 2018, he was on his way to his office. The brakes failed on Route 2. This could be used in court. Massachusetts law was on our side. Only one person in a conversation had to consent to being recorded. Since Susan knew it was legal, this was a murder, it was planned, this was the evidence I had been searching for. At 5, Susan came to my door. She looked worn out and pale. Did you hear it all? She asked. I could only nod, unable to speak. She sat down on the bed next to me. I am so sorry, Jordan. I am so sorry you learned the truth like this. I wiped a tear from my eye. It is okay. I had to listen for myself. I needed to be completely sure. Susan gently took the recorder from inside her shirt and placed it on the table. This is it, she said quietly. This is all the evidence we will ever need. When we enter the courtroom tomorrow, we will play this for the judge. Natalie will then spend her life in prison. I looked at the small black device. It was not bigger than my thumb, but that tiny recorder held the justice my father deserved. Tomorrow, I said in a whisper. Susan nodded her head. Tomorrow. After she left, I sat by myself, my gaze fixed on the recorder. I had been after her for 7 long years. The next day, she would hear her own confession in a courtroom. There would be no way for her to escape it. I just needed to get through one more day. That was all. One last day, and we would have justice. I knew I could make it through one more day. At 6 on Tuesday night, Susan knocked once more.
I answered the door and she was there with the small recorder. She held it like it was a priceless jewel. I have it, she said in a low voice. I took the device from her hand and sat on the bed. My computer was open and waiting. I connected the recorder and played the audio. Natalie's voice echoed in the small room. I cut the brake line, February 14th, 2018. He was on his way to work. The brakes failed on Route 2. He hit a tree and was killed on impact. I shut my eyes as warm tears rolled down my cheeks. This was the confirmation I had waited 7 years to get. I had to have proof. I had to know for sure. Now I finally did. It was not just a suspicion anymore. It was a terrible, undeniable fact. Susan sat on the bed beside me. I am sorry you had to hear that again. Do not be sorry, I told her, my voice surprisingly steady. This is what I have been working for. I moved the file to my secure online storage and sent it to the FBI. I also sent a copy to Agent Foster. The email subject line was plain: Confession, the murder of Michael Keller. After that, I rested my head back on the headboard. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, Natalie would be in court. She would be forced to hear this recording with no power to stop it. Susan stood and walked over to the table. We need to prepare the final evidence for the morning. I nodded and rose to join her. We organized all of the papers. There were printed documents, folders with clear labels, and a few flash drives. It was the result of a 7-year-long investigation. The first piece of evidence was the audio. There were two different files. On the first file, Natalie admitted her reason was the $3.2 million. The second file held Natalie's complete confession to cutting our father's brakes, and Barbara's admission that she knew about the entire plan. Both audio files were obtained legally and could be used in a Massachusetts court. The second type of evidence was the financial records. It showed the movement of $35 million in bonds for a new housing development. Out of that money, $22 million was moved through fake companies in the Cayman Islands. That money eventually went into a foreign bank account that belonged to a man named Connor Flynn. The third set of evidence was a collection of emails. In one of them, Natalie begged Connor Flynn for more time to move the money. In another, she told Richard Turner to deny my access to any funds and to ensure I was filmed at the bank. The fourth piece of evidence was a fake psychiatric report. A man named Dr. Anthony Reed signed papers to have me committed, but we had never even spoken. We believe he was paid $25,000 for his signature. The fifth was a restraining order that was also based on lies. Everything showed how long Natalie had been preparing for this. The last piece of evidence was the video from the bank's security cameras. It showed me simply attempting to get my own money. Natalie had planned the whole incident. At 8 o'clock, 6 large binders were on the table ready to go. Susan looked at them and said, 7 years of our work inside 6 folders. I looked at her and replied, it will be more than enough. At 8:30, I made a call to Agent Foster. Did the recording come through? I asked Foster. He replied, his voice heavy. Yes, it did. Jordan, I am truly sorry about your father. I told him, I am okay. What is the plan for tomorrow? Foster explained they had already spoken with Judge Chambers. The judge knew I was working with the Bureau. The next morning, he would open a sealed federal document. He would then reveal my real identity to the court. Afterward, the recordings would be played, and Natalie, Barbara, and Turner would be arrested. I asked, what about Connor Flynn? We will pick him up separately. Our main focus is Natalie. She might turn on Flynn for a shorter sentence. I shook my head. No, her pride is too strong for that. Then she will be in prison for the rest of her life, Foster said. Justice is finally coming. I hung up the phone. Tomorrow it would all be over. At 10 o'clock, Susan got ready to leave. She gave me a hug at the door. You need to get some sleep, she said softly. Tomorrow will be a very long day. I promised her I will. She looked at me closely. Jordan, your father would be so proud of you. I hope you realize that. I could only manage a nod, unable to speak. After she left, I locked the door. I took out my wallet and pulled out a photo I had carried for 7 years. It was a faded picture of my dad, Michael Keller, and his warm smile. I clutched the old photograph, my voice a soft whisper. Dad, I know you are not here, but I truly hope you would be proud. I did what you taught me. I never fell for Natalie's lies, and I found out what really happened. Tomorrow she will finally pay for what she did to you. I will prove to everyone your death was no accident. Your own daughter was responsible. I placed the frame on the nightstand and wiped my eyes. I made a promise 7 years ago to find justice for my father. I vowed to learn the truth. That promise is now fulfilled. Tomorrow is the final step. I lay back on the bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling of the quiet motel room. I could hear the faint sound of cars on Route 1 outside. In the morning, I will walk into that courtroom. I will sit right across from Natalie and watch her perfect life fall apart. She was so sure that she had won. She believed she had stripped me of everything, but she made one critical mistake. She completely misjudged my strength. Tomorrow, she will discover the high price of that error. I shut my eyes. I only had to endure one more night. That is all. Just one more night until I can stand before the judge and destroy Natalie for good. I could do that. At 9:30, Judge Chambers spoke to the lawyer. Mr. Montgomery, you may present your first witness. Mr. Montgomery got to his feet and buttoned his suit jacket. Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to bring Barbara Keller to the stand. My mother stood up from her seat beside Natalie. She walked slowly to the witness box, holding a tissue in her hand. She had on a pale blue dress. It was the exact dress she wore to my father's funeral 7 years ago. The clerk gave her the oath. Do you promise to tell the truth, the entire truth, and only the truth? My mother's response was almost inaudible. I do. Mr. Montgomery walked toward her. Mrs. Keller, could you please explain to the court how you are related to Jordan Keller? She is my daughter, Barbara replied. She is my younger child. And could you tell us about her mental state over the past few years? Barbara's voice began to tremble. Jordan has not been well. She is unemployed. She hardly ever goes outside. She just writes in notebooks all day, filling them with strange ideas I cannot follow. They are paranoid fantasies. She believes someone is watching her. My mother stopped to press the tissue to her eyes. She believes we are all trying to harm her, Mr. Montgomery pressed on. Have you seen any aggressive actions? Yes, she answered. Last Saturday, she created a disturbance at the bank. The guards had to remove her. Before that, she made threats against Natalie. She said awful things. What sort of things? Mr. Montgomery inquired. She claimed Natalie stole money. She claimed Natalie killed her own father. It is not true, but Jordan is convinced it is. I just remained at my table, my hands clasped together, listening to my mother lie under oath. She performed her role perfectly. She looked like a concerned mother, a victim who only wanted to help her unwell daughter. She did not know I had a recording of her admitting to everything. Mr. Montgomery gave a slow and thoughtful nod. Thank you, Mrs. Keller. I have no more questions. Judge Chambers looked toward me. Miss Keller, would you like to ask the witness any questions? I rose from my chair. Not right now, Your Honor. A soft sound spread through the courtroom. Natalie gave me a confused look. Barbara left the stand and went back to the chair next to Natalie. Mr. Montgomery leaned close and whispered something to Natalie. A confident smile formed on her lips. I settled back into my chair and waited patiently. At 10 o'clock, Mr. Montgomery stood up again. Your Honor, I call Dr. Anthony Reed to the stand. Dr. Reed went to the witness box. He was a tall, slender man of 52 with gray hair and thin-framed glasses. His tailored gray suit and calm presence suggested he had been here many times before. The court clerk gave the oath. Dr. Reed held up his right hand. I do. Mr. Montgomery walked closer. Dr. Reed, for the record, could you please state your credentials? I am a board-certified psychiatrist. I have been in practice for 25 years. I specialize in serious mental illness and risk evaluation. And you conducted an assessment of Jordan Keller? Yes, I did. It occurred on March 1st following a Section 12 petition. And what did you determine, doctor? Reed placed his hands together neatly on the ledge. Miss Keller displays signs of delusional thought, particularly delusions of being powerful. She claims to be an agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is not true. We have no record of her employment. She is convinced her family is part of a criminal plot against her. These are textbook symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia or a related disorder. Mr. Montgomery nodded. In your expert view, is Miss Keller able to handle her own personal matters? No, she is not, the doctor stated. She lacks any understanding of her illness. She rejects all medical care and is a risk to herself. Without help, her illness will only get worse. And what is your recommendation? A conservatorship is the correct course of action. She requires someone to oversee her finances and make sure she gets psychiatric help. Thank you, Dr. Reed. I have finished with my questions. Judge Chambers looked over at me. Miss Keller, do you have any questions for this doctor? I stood up. My voice was even and clear. Dr. Reed, how much money did my sister give you to write that report? Dr. Reed's confident expression hardened. I have no idea what you mean. Your Honor, I said, addressing the judge, I will present evidence on that very topic shortly.
Judge Chambers wrote something down. The court has noted your comment. Dr. Reed, you are excused. Dr. Reed departed the witness stand. He avoided my eyes as he walked by my table. Mr. Montgomery then got up to deliver his closing argument. The time was 10:15. Your Honor, the facts are undeniable. Jordan Keller is battling a serious mental illness. She has no work, no money, and cannot look after herself. Her own mother confirmed her unstable actions. A qualified psychiatrist has identified her delusions, yet she rejects all help. If this conservatorship is denied, her condition will deteriorate and the $3.2 million insurance payout will be lost. Her sister, Natalie Keller, is the ideal candidate for conservator. She is financially secure, very successful, and cares deeply about Jordan's welfare. I urge the court to approve this request. Mr. Montgomery went back to his seat. From across the room, Natalie shot me a smug glance. I knew that glance. It was the one she used when she was certain she had won. Barbara sat next to her, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. I noticed Susan in the third row toward the back. Her expression was perfectly neutral. 2 rows behind her, Agent Foster sat in a gray suit, observing everything with his hands clasped. The judge finally looked at me. Miss Keller, are you ready to present your defense? I stood. The courtroom became silent. I am, Your Honor, I replied. But first I must bring up the matter of the sealed federal document. The quiet chatter in the room became louder. Natalie's smirk disappeared. Mr. Montgomery gave the judge a puzzled look. Judge Chambers reached for a red folder on his desk. He paused for a second, then looked at me. All right, he said. We will handle that issue at this time. I glanced over at Natalie. Her face was now completely pale. This was it. This was the exact moment she knew she had been completely defeated. Thank you for staying with Jordan on this difficult journey. If you are still here, I would love it if you left a comment. Let me ask you this. If you were in Jordan's position with all the evidence against you and even your mother claiming you were crazy, what would you do? Would you surrender or would you fight to bring the truth out? I really want to read your thoughts below. Just to be clear, this is a made-up story for your enjoyment. Please stop at any time if you feel uncomfortable. But if you want to see the amazing truth revealed, the biggest secret is just about to be exposed. When Mr. Montgomery concluded his final remarks at 10:15, Judge Chambers announced a short break. Natalie and Barbara exited the courtroom and started a low, serious talk in the hall. Mr. Montgomery put his things in his briefcase, carefully not looking at me. I stayed in my chair, hands folded, and waited. From the third row, Susan caught my eye and offered a small, supportive nod. Agent Foster stayed in the back, his face impossible to read. At 10:45, the bailiff summoned us back inside. When Natalie and Barbara came back, Natalie's confident smile had returned. She was sure she had won. She had no clue what was coming next. Judge Chambers held the red folder. The courtroom waited in complete silence. His finger traced the outline of the wax seal, a red circle stamped with the official crest of the United States Attorney's Office. The judge brought the hearing to a halt, speaking slowly. I need to address a sealed federal document, he stated. It is from the United States Attorney's Office. I was told to open it only if we proceeded to a full hearing. We have reached that point. He took a small letter opener and broke the wax seal with a loud crack. The folder contained a large file with reports, photos, and legal papers. He started to read, his expression unreadable. 10 seconds felt like a minute. 30 seconds felt like an hour. The tension in the courtroom was thick. I could hear Natalie struggling to breathe and Barbara dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Montgomery fidgeted in his seat, his eyes fixed on the file with growing fear. Judge Chambers finally looked up, meeting my gaze. Miss Keller, he said, his voice neutral, please state your full name and job for the court. I stood up. My voice was strong and clear, filling the entire room. My name is Jordan Ann Keller. I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Boston Field Office. I work in the Organized Crime and Racketeering Unit. My badge number is 7824. I have served for 7 years. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Then chaos erupted. Reporters started writing frantically as shocked whispers spread through the room. Natalie's chair scraped loudly as she jumped to her feet. What is this? She yelled. That is not possible. She is making this up. Mr. Montgomery looked like he had been punched. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, his gaze shifting between Natalie, me, and the judge. Your Honor, I was not aware. Judge Chambers slammed his gavel 3 times, the sound like gunshots. Order! I need everyone to sit down right now.
The courtroom slowly quieted down. Natalie fell back into her chair, her hands gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. Barbara was now crying openly into her palms. I remained standing, my eyes on Judge Chambers. He placed the papers down and gave Natalie a cold look. "This file confirms," he started, his voice like steel, "that Miss Jordan Keller has been an undercover agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation since February of 2018. Her cover story was a freelance data consultant with a low income and no real job history. Her actual mission was to investigate financial crimes at Keller Properties. This mission included racketeering, wire fraud, and links to organized crime, specifically Connor Flynn of the Winter Hill Syndicate." All the color left Natalie's face. Then a deep red flush of anger replaced it as she tightened her jaw. The judge went on, his tone sharp. "The file also describes a conservatorship request filed by her sister, Natalie Keller, who is the main target of this investigation. The petition was an attempt to block a federal investigation and to claim a $3.2 million life insurance policy. That policy was supposed to go to Miss Jordan Keller on her 30th birthday." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Let me be very clear," Judge Chambers said. "This court was manipulated as part of a criminal plot." Mr. Montgomery quickly got to his feet, his face flushed. "Your Honor, I promise I did not know any of this. My client told me her sister was not mentally well and needed assistance." The judge cut him off. "Mr. Montgomery, your client deceived you and she deceived this court. Please take your seat." Mr. Montgomery dropped into his chair. He gave Natalie a look of complete disgust, but she would not look at him. The judge then focused on the witness box. "Dr. Reed, would you please stand?" Dr. Reed stood up, his face pale and his hands shaking. Judge Chambers leaned in. "Doctor, you swore an oath that you had evaluated Miss Keller. You gave her a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. You testified that her claims of being an agent were a delusion." Dr. Reed gave a sharp nod. "Yes, Your Honor, but it seems Miss Keller is indeed an agent." The doctor stopped talking. The judge's voice became quiet and threatening. "Dr. Reed, did Natalie Keller give you money to fake her sister's medical report?" Dr. Reed's response was almost silent. "I am certain that I conducted a standard." The judge moved closer to the doctor. "How much money did she give you?" Dr. Reed swallowed with difficulty, his voice trembling. $25,000. A gasp spread through the courtroom. Reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards as murmurs filled the air. The judge gestured to the bailiff. "Marshal, please take Dr. Reed into custody for the crimes of perjury and fraud." The officer acted right away, taking out his handcuffs. Dr. Reed offered his wrists, his face a mixture of fury and humiliation. As they led him past my sister, Natalie, he shot her a look of pure hatred. "You told me this was all legal," he said through his teeth. The marshal nudged him along, saying, "Let's move." Natalie just looked straight ahead, her jaw clenched and her breathing shallow. Judge Chambers then spoke to the entire room. "Agent Foster, please rise and show your identification." A man in a plain gray suit stood up from the back of the room. He was in his mid-40s and looked calm and capable. He held up his badge. "I am Special Agent Marcus Foster, from the Boston office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am Agent Keller's direct supervisor." He added, "Everything the judge said is accurate. Agent Keller has been working undercover since February of 2018. This hearing is a component of an active investigation." I watched Natalie look around the room, her face changing. Her face was no longer pale from shock, but red with a wild fury. Beside her, our mother Barbara was crying, her body shaking with sobs. Natalie's lawyer was already putting his papers into his briefcase, knowing his job was done. Judge Chambers then looked back at me. "Agent Keller, do you have anything else to show the court?" "Yes, Your Honor." I took a small USB drive out of my bag. "I have recorded conversations, bank records, and emails that prove my sister was involved in money laundering and racketeering." I stopped for a moment, letting the impact of my words fill the silence. "And in the killing of our father, Michael Keller, in 2018. The courtroom exploded. Reporters yelled questions as the audience pushed forward. Natalie shot out of her chair and charged at me, her face a mask of rage. Two marshals caught her before she could get to me. "You snake!" Natalie shrieked. "You framed me! You framed me!" The judge slammed his gavel down, the noise cracking like a whip. "Order! Miss Natalie Keller, sit down now or you will be physically removed from this room." Natalie finally sat, breathing heavily, her eyes filled with hate. Her hands were shaking on the table. Our mother was now crying without control. The lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, I would like to withdraw from representing this client."
The judge said simply, "Your request is granted. You are free to go." The lawyer picked up his things and left without a single glance at my sister. Judge Chambers stared at me with a serious expression. "Agent Keller, you may present your evidence." I walked to the clerk's desk and gave her the USB drive. "Your Honor, I have two audio files I would like to play. The first was recorded in a coffee shop on March 4th. The second was recorded at my family's home on the same day. My aunt, Susan Blake, who is a retired agent, legally made these recordings." I looked over at Natalie. Her face was now completely white. She knew exactly what was coming. The judge simply nodded. "You may play the first recording." The clerk put the drive in, and Natalie's voice suddenly echoed through the silent courtroom. Once the cafe recording finished, everyone had heard Natalie confess her entire plan was about money. They also heard our mother admit the family business was in deep financial trouble. The room was absolutely still. Natalie just sat there, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. Barbara cried softly beside her. The judge looked back at me. "Agent Keller, please go on." I walked to a large screen at the front of the courtroom. I picked up the remote and clicked a button. The first slide appeared. "Your Honor, I will now show the financial records for the Harbor Towers project. In 2024, Boston gave $35 million for this project. It was supposed to include 40% affordable housing. Keller Properties, which is run by Natalie Keller, was the main developer. I clicked the remote again, showing the next slide. The numbers on the screen told the story. Out of $35 million, we can only find $13 million. The other $22 million were funneled through three shell companies in the Cayman Islands. They were called Seabreeze Holdings, Ocean View Capital, and Blue Horizon Ventures. These companies had no offices and no staff. They only existed to hide stolen money. People in the courtroom began to whisper. Natalie's voice was sharp with anger. "That is not true." The judge gave her a stern look. "Miss Keller, you will get your turn to speak. Agent Keller, please continue." I moved to the next slide, which showed a simple chart. This chart shows exactly where all the money went. We followed every transaction. Each wire transfer has been documented. The money ended up with a man named Connor Flynn. He is a known associate of the Winter Hill crime syndicate. The whispering in the courtroom got louder. I could see reporters scribbling notes as fast as they could. My Aunt Susan sat in the third row, looking calm and proud. Agent Foster watched from the back with his arms crossed. I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I will now show emails between Natalie Keller and Connor Flynn." I clicked the remote. An email appeared on the screen and I began to read it to the court. On January 15th, 2025, Natalie Keller sent a message to a secret email account that belongs to Connor Flynn. She wrote, and I am quoting, "The project is falling behind. I need more time to get the funds out. Can you give me 60 days? Flynn answered the very next day. He wrote, "60 days and not one day more. If the police start asking questions, you are all alone." I let the words hang in the air before I moved to the next slide. On February 28th, at our mother's birthday party, Natalie sent another email. This one went to Richard Turner, a manager at Commonwealth Bank. She wrote, "The account is locked. Make sure she cannot get any money. And when she shows up at the bank, record everything. I need to prove she is not mentally stable." I clicked again, and Turner's reply came up. He had responded in less than an hour. He wrote, "It is all taken care of. The cameras are set. She will walk directly into the trap we have prepared." Judge Chambers looked over at Agent Foster. "Agent Foster, is Mr. Turner in custody?" Foster stood up. "Agents are going to the bank right now, Your Honor. We expect to arrest him within the hour." The judge nodded his head. "Thank you. Agent Keller, you can continue." I took a deep breath. This next part was going to be the most difficult. It was not because of what it would do to Natalie, but because it would show everyone how broken our family really was. "Your Honor, I have one last piece of evidence. This will explain the motive." I clicked the remote. A new document filled the screen. It was an official adoption certificate from the state of Massachusetts. The entire courtroom gasped. Natalie's eyes grew wide with shock. "Natalie Keller was adopted on March 12, 1987, I stated. "She was only 3 months old. Her new parents were Michael and Barbara Keller. This was always kept a family secret, but Natalie found out the truth when she was 16. Our mother started to sob uncontrollably. "Natalie, I am so sorry." "Be quiet, mother," Natalie hissed, her voice shaking with rage. I kept my own voice steady and calm. One week before my father passed away, he learned that Natalie had known about her adoption for a long time. They had a huge fight. He told her that it did not change a thing, that she would always be his daughter. But he also said he was going to change his will.
He was worried about her constant spending and wanted to protect the family's money. I clicked the remote a final time. The last document was a beneficiary update form. On February 7th, 2018, my father updated his life insurance policy. He took Natalie Keller off as the beneficiary and put Jordan Keller on instead. That policy was worth $3.2 million. I stopped for a moment. 7 days later, on February 14th, 2018, my father died in what the police called an accident. The courtroom was now completely silent. I looked straight at Natalie. Her face was a mixture of pain and anger. Our father did not push you away because you were adopted, I said softly. He pushed you away because he saw what you were turning into, and he tried to stop you. Natalie slammed her hands right down on the table and shot to her feet. He robbed me, she screamed. He said I was his daughter, but then he gave everything to you. Judge Chambers held up a hand to demand silence. Miss Natalie Keller. But Natalie was consumed by her anger, her eyes locked on me as tears poured down her cheeks. You have no idea what it felt like, she yelled, to believe you are part of a family just to find out you are a charity project. Then he gives you, his real child, everything, and I am left with nothing. Barbara begged her. Natalie, it was not that way. You stay out of this, Natalie snarled. The two of you lied to me my entire life. Order! The judge's voice boomed through the court. Marshal, please take Miss Natalie Keller into custody. As an officer came toward her, Natalie suddenly fell back into her chair and hid her face in her hands. Her whole body was shaking with sobs. For just a second, I felt a sharp pang of pity. I imagined her life feeling like she did not belong, her envy and her fury at being exposed. But then I thought about my father. I thought about the brake line she cut late one night. I thought about all her lies. I thought about the 7 years she tried to destroy my life, and just like that, my pity disappeared. Barbara was crying hysterically. Montgomery just stared down at his empty briefcase. His lawyer was already starting to pack up his briefcase. He understood that this case was completely lost. Judge Chambers looked at me with a stern gaze. Agent Keller, you have accused her of murder. Can you prove that? I held up a very small flash drive. Yes, Your Honor, this drive has a full confession on it. Natalie's head snapped up and her eyes were wide with pure terror. On March 4th, 2025, my Aunt Susan Blake met Natalie and Barbara Keller at their house in Brooklyn. In that conversation, Natalie admitted that she cut the brake line on our father's car. Barbara admitted that she knew about it and helped. The entire conversation was recorded on an FBI device. The law in Massachusetts requires only one person to consent, so this recording is legal. Judge Chambers leaned forward, now very interested. Let us hear this recording. I gave the flash drive to the court clerk, who put it into the audio player. A deep silence settled over the courtroom. And then Natalie's voice filled the room. It was cold, clear, and you knew it was her. I cut the brake line. It was February 14th, 2018. He was on his way to his office. The brakes went out on Route 2. His car went off the road, hit a tree, and he died right away. The room was deathly quiet. Judge Chambers watched me, waiting for what I would do next. Your Honor, I said loudly, I would like to call Susan Blake to the witness stand. Susan stood up from her seat in the third row. She was 58 years old, wearing a gray blazer with her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. My Aunt Susan walked to the witness stand with purpose in her every step. A court clerk met her to administer the oath. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? My aunt's voice was firm. I do. I then addressed her directly. Miss Blake, please tell the court your relationship to me. I am your aunt, she said clearly. I am your father's sister. And could you share your professional experience? I was a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 25 years, she explained. I retired in 2015 from the Financial Crimes Division. Did you have a meeting with Natalie and Barbara Keller on the 4th of March? Yes, two of them. One at Cafe Nero that morning and a second one later that day at the Keller estate. Did you use any form of recording device during these meetings? I did. An encrypted digital recorder issued by the Bureau. Massachusetts law allows for one-party consent, making these recordings legally admissible in court. And what was the reason for these meetings? Susan's voice never wavered. To get a confession about how my brother died back in 2018? A low murmur filled the courtroom. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to play the audio from the second meeting. It was recorded at the Keller estate on March 4th at 2:15 in the afternoon. Judge Chambers simply nodded.
You may proceed. I put the flash drive into the court's computer system. Clear voices suddenly filled the room. First, it was Susan's calm tone. What did you do? Then Natalie's voice, sharp and cold. I handled it. I handled him. Michael, that was not an accident, Aunt Susan. Then you could hear my mother Barbara, her voice tight with panic. Natalie, Natalie, she already knows. Mother, just look at her face. She is not surprised one bit. Susan, what did you do? Natalie's voice came again. I cut his brake line on February 14th, 2018. He was driving to his office. His brakes gave out on Route 2. The car went off the road, hit a tree, and he died instantly. I stood completely still, my hands hanging by my sides. I was listening to my sister confess that she had murdered our father. My mother Barbara's voice came through the speakers, broken by sobs. We did not have another option, Susan. We had to. Barbara, I knew about it. I knew what she was planning to do, and I did not do a thing to stop her. Natalie's voice cut in again. My mother was my partner in this. She was the one who let me into the garage that night. She turned off all the security cameras, and after he was gone, we acted like the perfect grieving family. The police never even questioned us. Susan's recorded voice then asked, But why? Why would you kill your own father? Natalie let out a short, harsh laugh. Because he was going to cut me out of his will. 2 weeks before he died, he told me he was changing everything. He was giving it all to Jordan. The business, the house, even the life insurance. I was about to be left with absolutely nothing, so I made sure that would never happen. My mother Barbara's voice sounded frantic. But it did not work. He had already signed the new papers a week before he died. We did not find out until after the funeral, Natalie. It was already too late. So I waited for 7 years. I waited for Jordan's 30th birthday. I waited for the $3.2 million to become available. And now I am going to take it. The recording stopped. A heavy silence fell over the entire courtroom. Judge Chambers leaned back in his chair. He stared at Natalie for a long, hard moment, and then his gaze shifted to me. Marshal, he said in a low voice, take Barbara Keller and Natalie Keller into custody. Charge them with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The court marshal began to walk toward them. Two federal agents stood up from the back of the room. Natalie jumped from her chair. No, no, this cannot be happening. An agent firmly took her by the arm. Natalie Keller, you are under arrest for the murder of Michael Keller. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Her arms were pulled securely behind her back. The loud click of the handcuffs echoed in the silent room. She glared at me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. You did this, she spat, her voice trembling with fury. You are the one who destroyed our family. I held her gaze, my own voice steady and calm. No, you did that all by yourself 7 years ago. Barbara began to cry as the second agent handcuffed her. She did not fight back, she just stood there as tears streamed down her face. I am sorry, she whispered, looking right at me. Jordan, I am so very sorry. I never wanted. You had 7 years to tell the truth, Mom, I said, my voice empty of all emotion. You decided not to. The agents led them both toward the courtroom doors. Natalie fought against their grip the entire way. Barbara just walked quietly with her head down. The room exploded into chaos as reporters started shouting and cameras flashed everywhere. Judge Chambers slammed his gavel down hard. Order! The doors swung shut behind them. The judge turned to the rest of the court. This court dismisses the conservatorship petition with prejudice. Jordan Keller is declared mentally competent and fully capable of managing all her personal and financial affairs. I am also forwarding this case to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office to pursue criminal charges. This hearing is adjourned. He brought his gavel down one last time. It was finally over. I just stood there, my hands still at my sides, feeling my heart pound inside my chest. Agent Foster walked over to me and held out his hand. That was excellent work, Keller. I shook his hand. Thank you, sir. Susan came and stood next to me. She put a comforting hand on my shoulder. You did it, she whispered. I could only manage a nod. I could not find the words to speak. It had been 7 long years, 7 years living a lie, 7 years of pretending, 7 years of watching my sister tear down everything our father had worked for, and now, at last, it was done. But I did not feel like I had won. I did not feel any relief. All I felt was completely drained. I looked over at the empty chairs where Natalie and Barbara had been sitting. Their table was a mess of papers and a water glass that was still half full. That was all that remained of the life they had just destroyed. My family was broken. My mother and sister would probably be in prison for the rest of their lives. The company would be taken apart. The house would be sold. Everything my father had created was now gone. But he was finally going to get justice. After 7 long years, justice was finally coming for him. As I left the courtroom, I knew the most difficult part of my journey was just starting, because the pain of being betrayed by your family does not just disappear when you hear the click of handcuffs. It stays with you in the silence that follows, in the empty chairs at family dinners, and in all the questions you will never get to ask. It is knowing that the very people who were supposed to love you more than anything chose money instead. I had won the case in court. But what did I really win? My father got his justice, and the truth was finally out. As for me, I got my freedom back, but I lost my entire family in the process. I bent down and picked up my briefcase. Susan walked with me toward the exit. A huge crowd of reporters was waiting for us, but I could barely even see them. After 7 years of fighting, it was over. At 1 o'clock, I walked out of the courthouse doors. The reporters were on me in an instant. The flashes from their cameras were blinding. Agent Foster and Susan stayed close on either side of me, clearing a path to the parking garage. Foster's car was a dark, unmarked sedan. I got into the back seat and Susan slid in next to me. "You did great in there, Jordan," Foster said as he started the car. "Your father would be so incredibly proud of you." I just looked out the window. I had just sent my own mother and sister to prison for life. Susan reached over and gently patted my hand. "You did the right thing." "I know," I replied in a quiet voice, "but it does not feel like a victory." We drove through the city of Boston without saying a word. I watched the world go by outside my window. Everything looked exactly the same, but my own life had been completely shattered. "Where would you like to go?" Susan asked me. I had nowhere to go. My townhouse felt tainted. The family home was now evidence in a crime. "I do not know," I answered honestly. "You can come and stay with me," Susan offered, "for as long as you need to." I nodded, unable to speak. The only family I had left in the world was my aunt. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Susan's living room watching the news report on the whole story. Family betrayal never arrives with a warning. It sits beside you at holiday meals. It shows up in phone calls that are filled with false concern. It might even whisper that it is all for your own good. I learned this the hard way. For 7 long years, I had to live a double life. I did it to expose the person who smiled to my face while planning my complete ruin, my own sister. This is my story of how I fought back from the absolute bottom to reclaim my life and get justice for my father. If this story sounds like something you want to hear, I hope you will stick around. And if it helps you in any way, please consider sharing it so others might find it too. I miss my father so much. After 7 years of working undercover, I knew it was enough. I finally left the bureau, and now I need to figure out who I am. My Aunt Susan was my rock through everything. We stood together watching a little girl play in the courtyard of my dad's finished project. This was his true legacy, not a corporation, but safe homes for families. Susan asked me what I would do with the money. I told her I am keeping the $2.2 million that remains. I am going to travel to all the places my dad used to talk about: Italy, Greece, Japan. After that, I will find a new place to begin my life again. When the final court date came, I could not make myself go inside. I watched everything on the news from my home, just needing the whole ordeal to be finished. The reporter's voice was steady. He announced that Richard Turner and Connor Flynn were in custody. Then my sister's face appeared on the screen. Natalie Keller was sentenced to life in prison without parole for first-degree murder. Barbara Keller received 25 years for conspiracy. Neither of them showed any emotion. I simply turned off the set. The biggest surprise, however, came later. Susan told me that our father had suspected Natalie all along. That is why he secretly made me the beneficiary. He was protecting me. 6 months later, the insurance payment of $3,200,000 was deposited on my 30th birthday. The money itself did not feel like a victory. The real win was finishing Harbor Towers. I used $1 million of my inheritance to complete the housing project my sister tried to ruin. The city agreed to rename it in my father's honor. His legacy is now a safe home for 120 families. I learned that seeking justice can bring you peace, but chasing revenge only poisons your own heart. Never make revenge your mission. Let the truth be your weapon and let your faith be your shield. The scars you get from betrayal are just a reminder of your own strength. Thank you for your time. I truly hope you never have to walk a path like mine, but if you do, I hope you can face it with courage.